Hey, welcome back to the show. We've got 5 major updates on what's happening in Venezuela. No rumors, no hyperbole, just straight facts about what's going on in the ground and what the United States is doing to ensure it returns to democracy and economic stability. You're going to want to stick around for this. The first major thing that's happening in Venezuela is the fact that political prisoners are finally being released. And this is not coming in small numbers. This is happening all over the country. And this is very important because it's a clear sign of leverage and cooperation after years of repression. After a nationwide address, Venezuelan officials announced that political prisoners who'd been imprisoned for years would now be free. Take a look.
Announcing the release, the Speaker of Parliament, the brother of interim President Delcy Rodriguez, said it was aimed at promoting national unity.
Consider this a gesture by the government of Venezuela with the intention of seeking peace. We must all make contributions to ensure that our republic continues its peaceful existence.
I think it's very important for people to understand why this is such a huge deal. This is the government of Venezuela appeasing the people instead of oppressing them. Remember, hundreds of thousands of people were killed, were starved, were murdered by this regime. And to transition from oppression to appeasement is huge. This is a complete change in the internal dynamics and the internal workings of the country. If you hear what he just said, they want peace. They want tranquility. They want stability within the country. This is not what they were looking for before. All they were doing was oppressing the people of Venezuela. And it's not just political prisoners that are being released. It's everyday Venezuelans who were rounded up in the streets just for making simple comments against the regime. Remember Rocio San Miguel, who was detained in 2024 under the charges, false charges, that she was plotting to assassinate Maduro? Another prominent figure that was also released was Enrique Marquez. He was an opposition leader and a former presidential candidate. He was arrested in 2024. For Venezuela to be releasing opposition leaders like Enrique Marquez, they know it's inevitable for democracy to take hold in Venezuela. And I think what a lot of these people are doing in the current administration is they're trying to get ahead of the game because they know that their time is limited. The second significant thing that's happening in Venezuela is oil agreements and economic engagement. Venezuela and the United States have agreed to export up to $2 billion of oil to the United States. This is going to help support energy markets and puts the United States at the center of future investments in the country. President Trump has already had his meetings with top oil executives that are looking to invest into the country. Take a look.
President Trump is continuing his quest to get American energy companies to invest in Venezuela's oil infrastructure. Now, yesterday, the president met with executives from more than a dozen oil and gas companies at the White House to discuss his plans and push for their commitment. Now, the meeting happened less than a week after the U.S. captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in a daring raid on his residence.
Now, I saw the whole meeting between President Trump and the oil executives, and I think the meeting went great. I think this is the beginning of a great transactional relationship between Venezuela and the United States. And I think both countries are going to benefit greatly from this relationship, especially Venezuela, because the oppression in Venezuela wasn't just political, it was economic. Its people were basically sitting on gold the whole time, and the government was preventing the Venezuelan people from accessing its own riches. But as I expected, there were some oil executives that were hesitant to invest in Venezuela simply because of its economic and political instability. But President Trump gave them assurances. He said, we will provide security for you. I guarantee it. Now, here's one of them expressing his reservations.
If we look at the legal and commercial constructs and frameworks in place today in Venezuela, today it's uninvestable. And so significant changes have to be made to those commercial frameworks.
I honestly don't think that security is going to be an issue for these countries who invest in Venezuela, because I anticipate a lot of close coordination between the United States and Venezuela to ensure that the internal stability of the country does not bleed into these companies' investments. And I don't think President Trump will hesitate to put more pressure on Venezuela to ensure that these investments are secure and that future investments are safe. Now, Chris Wright, the energy secretary, asked Chevron, which unfortunately is the only American company left in Venezuela right now, he asked them a great question about how long it's going to take them to build up their production. Take a look.
Mark, if you can update us on operations in the ground and with the appropriate approvals, what you might be able to achieve in the next 12 to 18 months, give us a little view from the ground.
You bet. So today, Chevron has 3,000 employees in 4 different joint ventures in Venezuela today. And over the past 5 to 7 years, they've taken production from about 40,000 barrels a day to 240,000 barrels a day, essentially getting those facilities and that equipment up to standards that would be something that people in the room would be more accustomed to. Given the work we've done with Secretary Wright and Secretary Burgum and even Secretary Bessent, I think we have a path forward here very shortly to be able to increase our liftings from those joint ventures 100%, essentially effective immediately. We are also able to increase our production within our own disciplined investment schemes by about 50% just in the next 18 to 24 months. And that's just leveraging what's on the ground. So to Secretary Rubio's comments about phase 1, this is taking the momentum of improvements we've already made there locally and building on those and creating more momentum for the people of Venezuela.
Now, this is great news for the people of Venezuela because that means that they're going to see economic prosperity within 18 to 24 months of Chevron starting to ramp up its operations. Now, remember, Chevron is the only company left in Venezuela now, but there is a plan to push a lot more American companies into the country. So that means that the economic gains for the Venezuelan people are going to be even greater. Over the next 2 years, oil revenue has the opportunity to reignite Venezuela's economy in a way that we haven't seen over the last decade. Remember, oil accounts for 90% of their export earnings. Just the recent agreement where the United States is buying 30 to 50 million barrels of oil from Venezuela is going to inject about $2 billion into the economy immediately. With sanctions easing and foreign firms re-engaging, analysts are predicting that Venezuela's oil production is going to be about 1.5 million barrels of oil per day. Just imagine the type of economic infusion that's going to be for the country. Venezuela can generate tens of billions of dollars in foreign exchange. This will stabilize the currency, restore imports, funding infrastructure, and jumpstarting broader economic recovery. This is no longer just survival revenue. It's a real pathway to growth if the political environment continues to open. Number 3 is President Trump's executive order, which he just signed, protecting Venezuela's oil revenue. What the executive order does is block the courts and block creditors from seizing Venezuela oil funds that are in U.S. accounts because it frames them as foreign assets. And in turn, those funds will be utilized to continue to stabilize the country instead of being paid in litigation. Now, the reason why this is important is because there is a lot of litigation out there against the country as a state. And that means that their assets here in the United States can be seized. By signing that executive order, President Trump takes that completely off the table. It basically declares that the money is the sovereign property of Venezuela, but it's being held by the United States. I think this executive order is a huge deal. And the reason I say that is because Venezuela owes ConocoPhillips $12 billion. They owe other countries several $billion as well because remember, the government of Venezuela nationalized all these oil companies. The only company remaining in Venezuela is Chevron right now. So all these other companies that had their assets liquidated by the state are now seeking compensation. Now, I think a funny part about the whole meeting between President Trump and these oil executives is he basically told ConocoPhillips to write off the $12 billion. So I think President Trump is serious about getting other companies in there and ensuring that these investments are secure, not only for Venezuela, but for the United States companies that go in there as well. Now, remember, this is also important because a lot of the other oil companies that were in the country are now out of there. This is going to be an exclusive deal with the United States and its companies so that we can ensure that that money goes back to the Venezuelan people and these American companies are eventually compensated for all the money that they lost previously. Number 3 are the exploratory steps that the United States is taking to normalize diplomatic relations with Venezuela again. And this includes assessing how and when these embassies can reopen in Caracas. Take a look.
Now, the United States and Venezuela said Friday they have started talks on restoring diplomatic relations. That's just days after U.S. forces captured former President Nicolas Maduro in a January 3rd raid that killed nearly 100 people. A U.S. delegation traveled to Caracas to assess reopening the embassy, while Venezuela plans to send officials to Washington. The move follows the release of political prisoners and President Donald Trump's pledge to boost U.S. oil investment in the country, which holds the world's largest proven crude reserves.
If the United States expects to be active in the country, especially when it comes to coaxing investments into the country, it needs somebody there. It needs a political representative there. However, security is going to be key for whoever they assign to that country because remember, the country is still unstable. There's a lot going on in Venezuela right now. And I think that question of security is going to linger for a long time. If you guys remember, after we took Maduro out of the country, there was gunfire all over the country. There was actually gunfire into the air, and they were saying that they were trying to shoot down some drones that the United States had there. We had nothing to do with that. Those were the actual criminals operating inside of Venezuela, trying to take advantage of the situation. So this government has a lot of work to do when it comes to the security and stability of the country, when it comes to keeping its people safe. But that doesn't change the fact that it's still very unstable. Take a look at the message that the State Department just put out.
You're watching Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall, a live look at the White House. We're getting some breaking news in that the U.S. government is issuing a new security alert urging Americans in Venezuela to leave the country immediately, citing security concerns and the U.S. government's inability to provide emergency assistance, according to the U.S. Embassy in Caracas. Getting some of this news in from Fox and from the TravelGov site, they say this: the security situation in Venezuela remains fluid. As international flights have resumed, U.S. citizens in Venezuela should leave the country immediately. Before departure, U.S. citizens should take precautions and be aware of their surroundings. There are reports of groups of armed militias known as colectivos setting up roadblocks and searching vehicles for evidence of U.S. citizenship or support for the United States. Remain vigilant and exercise caution when traveling by road. Monitor airlines' communications and websites for updated information. Venezuela has the highest travel advisory, level 4. Do not travel due to severe risks to Americans, including wrongful detention, torture in detention, terrorism, kidnapping, arbitrary enforcement of local laws, crime, civil unrest, and poor health infrastructure. Enroll in the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program, also called STEP, at the link that they've provided there.
You know, one thing I want to tell everybody out there that's watching this show right now is the fact that this is going to take some time. I hear some reporters asking questions about, when is this going to happen? When is that going to happen? This is going to take time. Remember, Maduro was there for a very long time. Before him, Chavez was there for a very long time. So getting this country under control is going to take a little bit of time. The judiciary is corrupt. The police is corrupt. Everybody in politics within that is also corrupt. Remember, cronyism and nepotism runs rampant in all these Latin American countries. So it's going to take a little bit for us to inject the country with democratic principles again. And as we do that, we're going to get a lot of pushback from Tren de Aragua, from the cartels that are operating within the country. And don't be surprised if the FARC and the ELN, who roam freely in the country, also have a hand in trying to destabilize the country. Number 5 is strategic leverage and regional impact. With American policy now reshaping the internal dynamics of the country, U.S. influence in the region has clearly grown, especially with the United States now reshaping the internal dynamics of the country. With American policy now directly shaping and presenting a new framework for stability, transition, and economic rebuilding. What's happening in Venezuela has geopolitical implications far beyond oil. For years, Iran, Russia, and China were using Venezuela as a strategic outpost. Iran to evade sanctions and expand their intelligence operations against the United States, Russia for military and energy leverage, and China to lock the country into debt dependency. Remember, China was Venezuela's primary loan shark. By forcing them out, the United States is reasserting hemispheric influence and restoring strategic balance. Iran loses a logistics hub, Russia loses leverage close to U.S. territory, and China loses a long-term economic stronghold. This isn't just a regional shift, it's a strategic win that strengthens U.S. security and completely reshapes power in the Western Hemisphere, in our own backyard. Look, Venezuela is standing at a crossroads, and what happens next will shape not just its future, but stability across the entire hemisphere. The removal of hostile foreign influence, the return of oil revenue, and renewed U.S. engagement present a real opportunity, but only if transparency and the rule of law can be maintained. Now, this is what strategic leadership looks like when it's done with leverage, not slogans. We need to keep watching the facts, we need to keep following the money, and we as the United States need to make sure that we hold Venezuela's current leaders accountable. And that's because Venezuela's future matters, not just to the Venezuelan people, but to our security. But at the same time, we need to understand that by destabilizing Venezuela and restabilizing it now, we destabilize countries in the region that continue to oppress their people. Because the next tyrannical regime to fall is Cuba. And President Trump made that very clear to them. They can either negotiate or they can fall. A large chunk of the country's revenue came from the discounted oil that they got from Venezuela. That's not going to happen anymore. This is what President Trump said. Cuba lived for many years on large amounts of oil and money from Venezuela. In return, Cuba provided security services for the last two Venezuelan dictators, but not anymore. Most of those Cubans are dead from last week's USA attack, and Venezuela doesn't need protection anymore from the thugs and extortionists who held them hostage for so many years. Venezuela now has the United States of America, the most powerful military in the world by far, to protect them, and protect them we will. There will be no more oil or money going to Cuba. Zero. I strongly suggest that they make a deal before it's too late. Thank you for your attention to this matter. I love the way that he ends his messages. Look, I think it's very clear that every country that seeks to do its people harm, that lives through tyranny, needs to be on the watch, because President Trump is not playing any games right now, especially when it comes to security and stability in our own backyard. Okay, that's it for today's show. Those are the 5 major things that are happening in Venezuela right now. Like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, stay balanced.